A young boy with a frightened but determined expression, frozen mid-step in a dark forest. His body is covered in faint, icy blue tendrils of shadow, and in the background, a massive, formless black monster with glowing yellow eyes looms. The scene is painted in a storybook style with deep blues and purples, contrasting with a warm, glowing wooden journal page floating in the boy's memory. Page 1. Frozen by the shadow monster's icy stare, Dew couldn't move a muscle. But his mind raced back to Grandpa's journal, buried under the floorboards of their hut. If the shadow gloom comes, the old page had read, "Fear is its food. Only a brave heart's light can break its darkness." A boy in a dark forest, frozen in place, with a tiny golden glow emerging from his chest, facing a black, shadowy monster that recoils slightly, eerie blue moonlight filtering through twisted trees. Dow's fingers twitched. The shadow gloom oozed closer, a puddle of liquid night. His heart hammered, but Grandpa's words echoed louder. "Brave heart's light," he whispered. Then he saw it. A faint golden flicker at his chest, like a firefly waking up. The gloom hissed and pulled back a sliver. A young boy stands in a dim attic, a golden glow emanating from his chest, pushing back a dark, shadowy puddle on the floor with wisps of darkness retreating from the light. The golden flicker grew, casting gentle light across the dusty floor. Dow stared, amazed. It wasn't a firefly. It was a tiny sun, born from his own brave heart. The shadow gloom writhed, its dark edges curling away from the warmth. Dow stepped forward, and the light pushed back the darkness. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice stronger now. A young boy walking through a dark cavern with a glowing golden orb floating near his chest. The orb casts warm light on stalactites and a shimmering golden path on the dusty floor. Dark shadowy edges recede in the background, fantasy illustration style, warm and hopeful tones. The tiny sun pulsed, and Dow felt its warmth sink into his chest, filling him with a courage he'd never known. The shadow gloom hissed, its black tendrils retreating like smoke before a flame. Dew looked around the cavern. Stalactites hung like frozen tears, and a faint path of golden light began to shimmer on the floor, leading deeper into the gloom. "This way," whispered the sun inside him. Dew took a breath and followed the path, each step lighting the way. Behind him, the darkness slowly faded. A glowing young boy, kneeling by a luminous pool beneath a massive silver tree with pearl-like leaves, in a dark cavern lit by golden light, the tree bearing one glowing fruit, illustrated in soft watercolor style with warm tones. The golden path wound through the cavern like a ribbon of honey. Dow noticed tiny crystals on the walls that sparkled when he passed, as if waking from a long sleep. "They remember the light," the sun murmured. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber where an enormous tree stood. Its bark was silver, its leaves were made of pale, glowing pearls. At its roots, a pool of water reflected the tree's light. Dew knelt and cupped his hands, drinking. The water tasted of cool mornings and ripe apples. When he looked up, the tree's lowest branch held a single, round fruit that pulsed with a heartbeat. "Take me," it seemed to say. A massive silver tree with glowing pearl leaves in a cavern, a boy with his hand reaching toward a pulsing fruit on a low branch, his other hand in his pocket, reflected star map visible on the tree's bark, soft golden and pearlescent light, magical atmosphere. On page 6, Dew reached for the pulsing fruit, but as his fingers touched its warm skin, a voice like wind through silver leaves spoke. "Not yet, little star-seeker. First, you must remember why you came." Dow pulled back his hand, puzzled. He had been following the golden path for so long, he had almost forgotten the beginning. The night the sky had whispered his name, the morning his grandmother had placed a small, smooth stone in his palm and said, "This will lead you home." He felt in his pocket. The stone was still there, warm. The tree's silver bark shimmered, and in its reflection Dew saw not his own face but a map of stars. "Look deeper," the voice murmured. A young boy with wide eyes leans toward a silver-barked tree, its surface reflecting a glowing star map, showing a memory of his grandmother in a cozy kitchen, handing him a small stone. The fruit on the tree pulses with warm golden light, night sky visible through sparse leaves. Dew leaned closer, his breath misting on the shimmering bark. The star map rippled, and he saw a tiny figure himself, standing at the edge of a dark forest on a moonless night. Above that smaller Dow, the sky was alive with falling lights, each one trailing a silver thread. Remember, the tree whispered. Dow's fingers brushed the warm stone in his pocket, and suddenly the scene on the bark shifted. Now he was in his grandmother's kitchen, her weathered hands cupping his as she pressed the smooth stone into his palm. Her eyes reflected the same stars. Every path begins with a single step of faith, she had said. The memory filled him with a quiet certainty. He looked at the pulsing fruit again, its glow gentle and patient. A young boy stands in a dark forest, holding a glowing fruit in one hand and a small stone in the other. A sparkling path of tiny lights leads forward through mossy trees, with silver threads trailing behind him from the starry sky. Soft, magical illumination highlights his face and the surrounding woodland. Dow reached up, his fingers closing around the cool, pulsing fruit. It detached with a soft chime, like a distant bell. In his hand, the fruit grew warm and began to glow brighter, illuminating the dark forest around him. The path ahead, once hidden, now sparkled with tiny lights embedded in the moss. The tree's branches swayed, and a gentle voice, like wind through leaves, said, "The starseed is yours. Where will you plant it?" Dew looked down at his grandmother's stone in one hand, and the starseed in the other, feeling their shared pulse. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the lit path, the silver threads from the memory trailing behind him like a guide. A dark forest path lit by tiny glowing lights in the moss, with a fork in the trail. One path leads to a starlit clearing, the other to a tunnel of dark brambles. A young boy stands at the fork, holding a glowing fruit in one hand and a small stone in the other, with faint silver threads trailing behind him. A fox with autumn-colored fur watches from the side. Soft, magical lighting, watercolor style, children's book illustration. The path wound through the ancient woods, each step Dow took, causing the tiny lights in the moss to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The silver threads from his grandmother's memory danced behind him, weaving a faint pattern that seemed to point the way. He clutched the starseed tightly. Its glow pushed back the shadows, revealing creatures with eyes like dewdrops peeking from behind ferns. A fox with fur the color of autumn leaves trotted silently beside him for a few paces, before vanishing into the underbrush. Dow paused at a fork in the path. One way led toward a clearing bathed in starlight, the other toward a dark, whispering tunnel of brambles. He looked at the stone in his hand, still warm, and the starseed, pulsing with its own gentle light. A soft hum rose from the stone, and the silver threads tugged slightly toward the clearing. Dow nodded, his decision made. A mystical clearing in an ancient forest, centered on a luminous tree, with a quartz trunk and glowing star-shaped leaves, under a starry sky. A young boy with dark hair stands holding a glowing seed, his expression earnest. Beside him, silver threads of light float toward the tree. An old woman with silvery hair and midnight eyes emerges from the roots, wearing a cloak woven of moonlight and shadow. Soft silver grass and dewdrop-eyed creatures peek from the ferns. Illustration in a soft, magical realism style. Warm blues and silvers with touches of emerald, lit by gentle bioluminescence. Dow stepped into the clearing, and the world hushed. The grass here was soft and silver, each blade tipped with a droplet of light. In the center stood a tree unlike any he had ever seen. Its trunk was made of shimmering quartz, and its leaves were tiny glowing stars that rustled like wind chimes. The silver threads from his grandmother's memory drifted toward the tree, wrapping around its lowest branch. Dow held up the starseed, and the tree's leaves quivered, casting a rain of light upon him. From the shadows under the tree, an old woman emerged, her eyes like pools of midnight. She smiled. "You carry the seed of a fallen star," she said, her voice soft as falling petals. "And the memory of one who loved you. What is it you seek, child?" Dew opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at the stone in his other hand, still warm, and thought of his grandmother's laugh, her hands in the garden, the last story she told him before she grew too tired to speak. "I want to remember," he whispered. "Everything." A mystical clearing with a quartz tree bearing star-shaped leaves. An old woman with silver eyes and midnight dark robes stands under the tree, pointing toward a small black pool near the roots. A boy with a glowing seed in one hand and a warm stone in the other hesitates at the pool's edge, his face lit by soft starlight. The grass around him glimmers with tiny points of light. The old woman nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting those very words. She reached out a finger stained with silver dust and touched the starseed in Dao's palm. A pulse of light rippled outward, and suddenly the clearing was filled with echoes. 1,000 whispers rising from the grass, the leaves, even the stones. "Memory lives in everything," she said. "But to remember everything, you must be willing to let go of something else." Du clutched the warm stone tighter. "What do I have to let go?" She pointed to the shadows behind her, where a small pool of ink-black water shimmered. "A single tear from your heart's deepest loss. Place it in the pool, and the starseed will show you all that you seek. But once you give the tear, you can never cry that same grief again." Du looked at the pool, then at the tree, where the silver threads of his grandmother's memory glowed like a promise. He thought of her hands, her voice, her warmth. He thought of the hollow ache that followed him every night. Slowly, he took a step toward the water. A young boy kneeling beside a dark pool in a moonlit forest clearing, a glowing starseed in his hand, a tear falling into the water that ripples with silver light. An old woman with silver-dusted fingers watches from behind, and above the pool a translucent image of a kind elderly woman in a flower field appears. Soft blues, purples, and glowing silver highlights, storybook illustration style, gentle and magical atmosphere. His reflection rippled in the dark pool, a boy holding a glowing stone. He knelt, the cool dampness of the moss soaking into his knees. The old woman's words hung in the air, heavy as the silver dust on her fingers. Dao closed his eyes and called up the memory he had locked away. The morning he found his grandmother's rocking chair empty, the blanket still warm. A single tear slid down his cheek, catching the light of the starseed, and fell into the pool with a sound like a tiny bell. The water swirled, then stilled, and from its surface rose a shimmering image of his grandmother, walking through a field of silver flowers. A young boy kneeling by a dark pool, his reflection rippling as he holds a glowing stone in his hand. The pool's surface shows a shimmering image of an elderly woman in a field of silver flowers, her hand raised, silver petals floating around her. The scene is lit by a soft, magical light, with moss around the pool and a forest in the background. The image flickered, and Dao's breath caught. His grandmother turned, her face soft and smiling, just as he remembered. She raised a hand, and silver petals drifted from her fingers, swirling into the air around her. A voice, gentle as the rustle of leaves, reached him from the pool. "You have carried my seed, little star. Now let it grow." Du looked down at the glowing stone in his palm, now warm and pulsing with a steady light. He stood, the moss letting go of his knees with a soft sigh, and stepped forward, closer to the water's edge. A young boy kneeling beside a glowing forest pool, gently placing a luminous stone into the water. A silver sprout with shimmering leaves bursts upward from the stone, opening into a single bright flower. The boy's grandmother's face appears in the pool's reflection, soft and smiling. Moonlight and fireflies illuminate the scene, with deep blue and green tones. Du knelt at the water's edge, the warm stone cradled in his hands. Beneath the surface, silver roots began to unfurl, reaching toward him like eager fingers. His grandmother's smile rippled across the pool's face. "It knows you," she whispered. Du pressed the stone gently into the water. It sank, and where it touched, a tiny sprout burst upward, leaves shimmering with starlight. He felt a tug in his chest, like a thread connecting him to the growing plant. The sprout twisted, climbed, and opened into a single, glowing flower. A young boy kneeling at a moonlit pond, touching a single glowing flower that rises from the water, petals shining with starlight. His grandmother stands behind him, smiling softly, while silver roots and tiny sprouts radiate beneath the surface. The scene is magical and intimate, with a dark forest background and luminous highlights. Dew reached out, and the glowing flower turned toward his fingers, its petals brushing his skin like a whisper. A warmth spread up his arm, and he suddenly saw the forest through the plant's eyes. The dance of soil creatures, the songs of roots weaving underground, the memory of every seed his grandmother had ever planted. He gasped as the flower's light pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Now you see," his grandmother said, her voice blending with the rustle of leaves. "The garden knows you too." A young boy kneeling in a glowing forest, his hands emitting golden light as green shoots burst from dry soil beneath him, with an elderly woman smiling nearby among luminous plants and trees. Dao looked down at his hands, now shimmering faintly with golden light. The garden around him seemed to lean in, leaves and petals tilting toward him as if listening. "What do I do now?" he whispered. His grandmother smiled and gestured to a small, wilted patch of earth at the edge of the clearing. "That spot has forgotten its song," she said. "Sing it back." Dew hesitated, then knelt and touched the dry soil. He closed his eyes and hummed a low, gentle tune, the one she used to sing while planting. The ground trembled, and tiny green shoots pushed through the dust, stretching toward the fading sun. A young boy climbing a ladder of green vines that spirals up into a golden sky, with an old woman standing below in a glowing garden, and a golden door floating among the clouds at the top. The shoots grew and grew, curling into vines that wove themselves into a ladder, rising up and up into the sky. Dao looked up, his eyes wide. At the top, the clouds parted, revealing a single golden door. His grandmother's hand rested on his shoulder. "Every song you sing opens a door," she said, "but you must choose which one to walk through." Dao took a breath, grasped the first rung, and climbed. A young boy and his grandmother, walking hand in hand through a magical field of luminous, humming flowers under a starry sky, with a golden door glowing in the background amidst soft clouds and curling green vines. Dew climbed higher and higher, the ladder warm and steady beneath his hands. When he reached the golden door, it swung open without a sound. Beyond it was a field of glowing flowers, each one humming a different note of a forgotten lullaby. Grandmother stepped through beside him, her smile soft. "You found the door of courage," she whispered. And as they walked together among the singing blossoms, Dew knew that every song he ever sang would lead him home,